Hey Shaun, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for the invite. Glad to be here.
Super excited to have another founder that is on the channel as well, and would love to dive into your product and challenges you see in commercial real estate. But before that, let's hear a little bit about your background.
I got my start actually in astrophysics. Being an idealistic teenager, I wanted to go and do space stuff because space is cool. I ended up pivoting for grad school into remote sensing, so Earth observation, working with Earth observation satellite data and GIS. It sounds like a big jump, but it's actually not, because if you're working with astrophysics data, you're working with these satellite telescopes like the Hubble Space Telescope. Now the James Webb would be a good example, even though that wasn't up yet when I was in school. If you just have your satellites backwards and instead of taking pictures of space, they're taking pictures of the Earth, well, then you have remote sensing. So it seemed like actually a natural fit. Came out of that, ended up doing consulting work in geospatial data science, did a stint in the mobility data industry. So that's the industry where they have that anonymized cell phone data that gives you foot traffic information, similar to companies like Placer. Placer.ai are kind of in that space. And then more recently, I was kind of deciding what I want to do next, and I decided it was time to start a startup.
Decided it was time to start a startup, which is seems like an easy thing to say, but it's actually a very difficult thing to pursue. Before we get into the challenges of how starting a company is, let's first cover what are some of the challenges in commercial real estate that you were looking to tackle.
I know they're mostly residential real estate investors, and I'm more on the focusing on the commercial real estate side. But I think a lot of the principles carry over. One of the so I guess the inspiration for it came out of the work that I was doing at the mobility data company, where we were selling our data to commercial real estate companies. Some of our best clients were commercial real estate firms, relatively big names. And the thing that always struck me as odd was the data wasn't being used across the organization. It was being used by a small team of maybe 3 analysts that sat in some centralized office and served products to something like 50,000 brokers. We always had this concern where if one of those analysts left the company, we would lose them as a client because we didn't actually have any expansive coverage in the company. We were just selling our data to this tiny team that was serving an incredibly large group. And the thing that I was realizing was that if we could get the data products or the actual insights or analytics closer to the business use cases, instead of selling them these sort of raw ingredients that are data, we could sell across the organization instead of to this tiny analytics team. So that was largely the inspiration for jumping into this, is trying to bridge that gap between what's happening in tech and what's being used in commercial real estate.
Taking a step back, there was a large amount of data that had to do with movement, possibly like cell phone data as well. And that was not clean data. So there only could be access really through data professionals, which they then would drive analytics from it and insights that was then used by a way larger population. So there's this middle person in between. And what you were seeing as a bottleneck was that the end user wasn't able to actually access the data without this intermediary team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. An issue that we see a lot in tech when working with various verticals or various industries is the tech companies, they try to be very horizontally focused instead of verticalized. So they're selling like the raw ingredients that you could use to make dinner. And that would be, this large amounts of data. This would be database technologies. This would be, fun foundational AI models or LLMs. And then what the people in the industry actually need is they need something that's either ready to eat or use in their use case, or at the very least something that's more like a Blue Apron where it's giving you the ingredients and it tells you how to kind of put them together.
And it also, like, I've seen this throughout other industries as well, where when you only have one person or a couple of people who have insight into the data, but maybe not as much knowledge about the industry itself, the whole process is pretty slow. So it's like the data vendor gives a team data. Then the data team is now asking product managers or other folks what they want to see. But then there's like this loop, this constant loop that goes on. And sometimes these projects can take anywhere from 3, 6, 12 months to complete.
So our first project with a client, when we started Yuzu Data, we were working with a professional sort of brokerage advisory firm. And that firm had a client who was a broker, and that broker had an end client who was a national retail chain. And so every single thing we did would go through these stages. And so it would, check with our client, and then he would check with the broker. And then maybe if it passed the broker's idea, it would check with the end client. And as you can imagine, the project went much, much longer than we had anticipated for actually wrapping it up, simply because of that difficulty in the communication loop.
So yeah, that makes sense. And taking a step back, why is like location data even informative for commercial real estate?
Geez, that's an interesting question, because commercial real estate is really all about location. But historically speaking, most of the actual mechanisms around commercial real estate have been done locally, or they've been done by people who know the market. I actually borrowed this from someone that I met at a recent commercial real estate event called ICSC. He's sort of one of my mentors in the space, but he was saying that if a tech company comes and says, hey, I have this model, it's going to make decisions about where you should put a store, or, where you should invest in property, and it's going to do it way better than you. And you have some guy, some kind of older guy named Carl, who's just been living in that market for, his entire life, and he's been doing brokerage for like 20 years. And the question was, who would you bet on? Would you bet on the model, or would you bet on the guy who has the local expertise and understanding? And the sort of consensus is most people would bet on Carl every single time. And that's because, models, there are a lot of reasons for that. Models tend to be a little inflexible. They tend to need training. They tend to make mistakes while they're figuring out how to do things, and need to be adjusted and retrained. And then also they need to be explainable and auditable by people. One of the sort of founding principles of Yuzu Data is that we don't build things that make decisions for you. We just build things that give you the pieces to make decisions better.
That's powerful. Basically providing all of the information, analytics, modeling, so that you can actually drive a decision. And a lot of folks, they get really nervous about AI and automation, especially in real estate, and how it plays a role without removing them entirely. And that's one of the greatest parts about real estate, is that it is so hyper local that I think there's always still like a human element that's needed. So automating everything end to end is probably not always the best case to just make a single decision, where humans and their ability to understand an area is still very important.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think not just the human understanding of the area, but also the human's ability to build relationships, manage the mechanisms that need to be done to make things move smoothly, and then also interpret what they're getting out of the models. One of the things that I've been saying lately is that commercial real estate and people who get into commercial real estate, it's all driven by relationships. Brokers are fantastic at maintaining these relationships over their lifetime, working with people, helping understand what they need, helping them get through a very cumbersome process. Because of the influx of data and technology and the need to make better decisions with data, more and more of these people in commercial real estate roles have been forced to become more like data analysts. They're spending their days hunched over spreadsheets instead of building those relationships. That one of the things that we do is, getting more of those processes automated and leveraging AI and technology to get rid of the spreadsheet drudgery, or make that part of it automated or easier, so that brokers and so that people in commercial real estate can spend more time doing the part they're good at, which is building the relationships, interpreting these things for the clients, and giving them options.
Refocusing their shift on what is actually going to drive their revenue as well, and build relationships. So we've talked a little bit about the current problems commercial real estate faces. Now, I expect in the year 2024 that there's probably some solutions out there. Where are they falling short for what the industry needs?
And I know we've been jumping around a bit on the topics. These are topics that I think about a lot, and so I tend to go off on a little bit of tangents. As far as what the industry needs and what's out there right now, there are a lot of scalable solutions. So there are a lot of things where they are a platform that people can log into, and it'll help them walk through some sort of analysis or some sort of work. So great examples of this are things like Placer.ai. They do it really, really well for a lot of things. It's why they're ubiquitous in commercial real estate right now. There are companies like Sites USA has a really good platform, but there are still use cases that these platforms don't meet. They meet a lot of use cases if you're doing a very structured analysis that is that essentially everybody does. But if you have custom inputs, if you need to use first-party data, if you need to bring in your own store's revenue data, if you need customization to the way that your company does things, platforms get a little bit more difficult to use. And we also all have platform fatigue, and no one wants another platform in their life to log into. One of the reasons that we've been leaning a little bit more on custom solutions is the customization required is actually not that heavy to customize it to a company's individual use case. And one of the things that's coming with AI, now that AI can write some code, is you can actually build AI agents to do small levels of customization for you.
You give an example of that?
Not a very good one right now. We're kind of betting on the fact that in the next year or two, that's going to get better. We've put different versions or chunks of code into the way that we design things. We design them modularly so that we have different chunks of code that can be modified or enabled through an AI agent. SaaS companies have always steered away from customization in their products because it seems like an expense. It seems like they'd have to maintain multiple versions of their products. That rule is probably going to go away in the near future here. Which is important for commercial real estate, because in commercial real estate, we have sort of an inverse network effect. You're familiar with the concept of network effects. The more people that you have in your network, the more people you have using the platform, the more valuable it is. That's how Facebook became big, right? The more people that are using Facebook, the more people that are using LinkedIn, the more valuable being on that platform is. In commercial real estate, if you have a useful tool, it's like selling it to an investor. The more people that are using it, in some ways, the less valuable it is because it's no longer a competitive edge.
That's something that we've been kind of exploring and diving into a bit on our camp, since we're more so the B2C, as to how we restrict access at what levels. Because if you have 100 plus investors all have access to the same tool for a small market, there may not be enough deal flow. But that's a whole other case. You have now understood different problems in commercial real estate, why customization is really important in the space, also to not just try to solve it with another platform, because that is a fatigue for a lot of individuals. So where do you actually get the light bulb idea and say, I'm going to found my own company to solve this problem?
A lot of that was discovered after starting Yuzu Data through discussions in commercial real estate. We started out more general than that. We were just providing geospatial services and solutions. And commercial real estate was one of the areas that we were targeting. And we only recently decided to fully pivot into commercial real estate. If we were to go back and say, well, what is the light bulb idea, or what is the sort of key insight that led you here? For me, it would be understanding how underutilized location intelligence and geospatial analytics are. Because every industry that's location based, so that'd be, commercial real estate, residential real estate, retail, you have some GIS function. So this is a person with a title that's related to GIS. It's an acronym for Geographic Information Systems. They often are a very isolated department. They use a lot of Esri tools, and they build these one-off reports. Those don't go very far in the organization. They don't get reused again. There's very limited value in that's actually created despite the GIS professionals doing a lot of work. So that the main driver was realizing that there's a lot of potential for geospatial insights to go further than they are.
So when it comes to geospatial analysis, are we talking about analyzing an area based on a county, a zip code? How detailed does it actually go?
Yeah, so it depends a lot on the analysis being done. So often you will need to do an analysis at the national level where you are looking for markets that a company may want to enter, or markets that may match a certain demographic criteria. And then usually once you've identified a market, we're looking at some metro region. Once you're within that market, then you need to identify sub-markets depending on some criteria. So it varies a lot. You need to be able to scale between them is usually what happens.
And what are the challenges that these companies face as they're bringing in technology? Because real estate is one of the later domains to be able to really utilize AI, automation, and tech. What are challenges that you see when you try to propose some solutions here?
So that's part of the reason that I wanted to jump into commercial real estate, even though my background there is relatively limited, is they've traditionally lagged behind. They've traditionally been the last sort of group to the table to get access to innovations in technology. And when we were pivoting to commercial real estate, a lot of people sort of implied that I shouldn't. And they said things like people in commercial real estate don't want technology. They said, brokers and brokerages, they're all Luddites. They want to do things with a paper and pencil. They don't want anything technological. And personally, I haven't really found that to be true. The more people I talk to, the more I discover that there's actually a disconnect between what tech companies are producing and the actual ROI generating use cases that people in commercial real estate need to solve for. And so there's a lot of that. I gave the example earlier of a black box model that kind of does something for you, which obviously no one wants. It's a little bit like that. I've been kind of calling it tech arrogance, which as a tech person, I probably should not be saying. But that seems to happen a lot where they're building a solution and they're telling people in commercial real estate, this is for you, this will make your job better, you should use this, without really understanding the job that the people in commercial real estate are doing. And when you get close to their actual use cases or needs, your technology gets adopted super quickly. I think, I mentioned Placer.ai earlier. I think they're actually a good example of this because they got their technology solving and generating reports and getting very close to users' needs for specific use cases. And now every company in commercial real estate has a Placer subscription. So it's not that they're slow to adopt technology. It's just that the technology being offered up most of the time just doesn't actually do what they need it to do. It doesn't solve an actual problem.
This actually brings me back a little bit from earlier in my career when we were implementing models of how to identify fraud in the trading markets. And there was met with a lot of resistance of, I know how to analyze the data if I go into a spreadsheet. Like, if you're telling me that someone's 95% chance of committing fraud, that's still not enough. I need more information. So we met them halfway by automating a lot of the spreadsheet work they were doing, as well as having different insights and dashboards based on what their current workflow was. So that when now introducing modeling and scoring for fraud potential individuals, it was a progression of all these little steps that made them more comfortable to adopt that technology, but also the technology itself now had a lot more context to it rather than just here's the score and just go by whatever the score says. Very black box.
You were giving them the pieces and the information and letting them make the decision, or at least letting them audit the decision before they pull the trigger. That's exactly what's needed from AI. Everyone thinks that we want AI to make decisions for us, but we actually don't. We want to make the decisions. We just want AI to do the research for us and give us, the options that are presented in a trustworthy and understandable way.
How do you see it going forward with your type of company, but also just generally in the industry? How much of an impact do you think it will have in the next 5 years per se?
Well, I think we've got a lot of people that are hyping to heights that may not be justified. I think we've also got a lot of people that are disparaging AI because they've been disillusioned for whatever reason. I think realistically, the real value is in integrating AI with other data and tools and machine learning and building it into these workflows so that it adds tangible value. The commercial real estate companies that are using AI will have a faster deal flow. One thing that I've heard from people in commercial real estate over and over again is that in this industry, speed is everything. Any company in commercial real estate that has a speed advantage generated by AI or automation or machine learning will be able to pull ahead of their competitors because they will close more deals per year.
Yes, having that information at their fingertips, doing research faster. How would someone today do the process of analysis for location manually? And then how do they use your company to do it automatically?
We generally build custom workflow solutions for that. An example is a client that we're working with right now. So they have a manual process where when they're working with their end client, which will usually be a retail brand looking for a location, when they're working with their end client, they will take the existing stores of that client, they'll do customer segmentation, they'll look at revenue, and they'll build up this model. And then based on that, they'll look at a number of locations in a market that brand wants to enter and say, of these locations, we think these ones match best what will generate revenue or what will give you the customer base that you need to be successful. This is generally called a market suitability analysis. There are a lot of different terms for it, though, so the terms are not very standardized in commercial real estate, but that's the one I'm going with. This process, all in all, could take them upwards of a few days to a week of work going between the brokers, their GIS team, and pulling all the data manually. We built them a workflow automation that goes through, and once they just add the locations, they can run it in 2 minutes and get back the answers. So it's a pretty quick change. But the part that I would say I'm almost most proud of is at the end, and we're still building this out. We actually layer in some AI automation. We layer in AI to create an explanation of what's happening in the workflow. We have an explanation characterizing the brand's customers that's all written out as talking points so that their brokers can explain the analysis to the end customer. Here's a report. You don't really know how we got there. It explains every step of the way in a very understandable way.
Wow, that provides so much value, right? Not just saying this is our recommendation, but providing the charts, the explainability. And so that person is empowered to now be the expert off of the data that was reviewed to their own clients, which is very, very useful. And one that I hope to see in the AI space in general, that as there's more solutions, there's a lot more explainability for users as well.
I'm very opposed to the whole, hey, we're smart, trust us approach to analysis. If you understand an analysis, then you should be able to explain it. And in our case, we also trained an AI to explain the analysis, which makes things even easier because then they run it. They don't have to reference with us. They can actually get the explanation, even though it's different than the last time it was run.
Excellent. Well, with that, Shaun, I want to do a slight pivot over from you as a founder. And it's not easy to start up a company. There's a lot of pivots that also occur. So has there been a time as you've started to use the data where you have shifted your priorities or changed the future trajectory of what you plan to do?
All the time. I mean, we're even doing it right now. So we have this problem where we're split between two relatively good product offerings that we have. One is the sort of automations of these workflows. The other is mostly coming from conversations with people in commercial real estate. We actually built an AI tool that parses leases. So in commercial real estate, unlike residential, the leases can be enormous. We're talking 100 pages, 200 pages. Oftentimes it's in this photocopied PDF document that the text is completely skewed on one page, it's faded on another, there are handwritten notes in it. And so we dove deep into the world of large language models to build a system and train a system to parse and understand and answer questions about those kinds of lease documents in a process that's generally known as lease abstracting. And we've had good results. We've so far gotten up to where we can parse and handle a lease up to 130 pages without any errors. It does create kind of this fragmentation because we're doing all these geospatial analyses, and we've also got this AI lease product, and both of them are very compelling to us. Right now, we're kind of doing that old Western thing where you're riding two horses and you have like 1 foot on each horse and they're like kind of diverging.
Trying to focus this. Once you dive into one problem, you realize that there are many others, and it's exciting, right? To see what can be solved utilizing technology or communication. But of course, there's always the give and take. You have to understand how to prioritize. Shaun, what do you see for the future of PropTech in commercial real estate?
I see obviously a lot more AI adoption is going to happen. Right now, we have a situation where a lot of the platform companies are kind of just jamming AI into their platform. But I think we're going to see more and more AI first products where they generate more value. I think we can go back to the one that I said earlier where, in commercial real estate, speed is everything. So commercial real estate companies that are embracing technology and are embracing AI from a level-headed and realistic standpoint are going to really pull ahead just because they're going to have a faster deal flow.
So, Shaun, what is your daily habit?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time kicking things. In addition to being a tech person, startup founder, I'm a martial artist. And so I find that just getting a good workout, working on kick combos usually puts me in a better mood and mental state to get things done.
That's excellent. I love being able to work out or even go for a walk. Sometimes, like a math problem or some coding problem that I had, I was stuck on for part of the day. Just like it's unlocked, it's solved just by doing a quick walk. So that's great that you get some energy out. One of your favorite books?
I'm skeptical of a lot of business books. I think that a lot of them are either bad advice or it's a short idea that they fleshed out into a book for no reason when it could have been a blog post. There are also some that I've read where it seems to just be a long advertisement for someone's consulting company, which I'm not really a fan of. But as far as actual authors go, I do really like Derek Sivers. He writes about life and about business. I find that he has kind of an experimental approach to every aspect of his life that reminds me sort of Richard Feynman, where you just kind of do things without really worrying about whether it's the way it's traditionally done. And sometimes you get different results than people get when they do things in the traditional ways. Yeah, he's I think he's got one called I think it's Anything You Want. That is a good one to start with. Usually it's pretty short.
We'll definitely check it out. And do you have any pieces of advice for those getting into tech, real estate, technology?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I tend to think general advice isn't always useful because even if you're giving someone good advice, it might be at the wrong time. So they might need to be in a different phase of their life to receive that advice. I will go kind of meta and say that a good piece of advice is to only give advice when asked. In terms of recreation, I'm a martial artist. I'm also a swing dancer. And so I learn a lot of very complicated dance moves. And one of the absolute worst things is when you're in a dance class and you're working with someone and you're trying to figure out this move and they stop and start giving you unsolicited verbal advice while you're still trying to figure out how to get your foot to do this thing. So yeah, give people advice when asked, but only then.
I agree with that. Also, it kind of applies to like language too. When you're like learning how to speak a new language, and someone's like, it's good to like throw in some words here and there to help like build a vocabulary, but just like stopping the entire flow is not as useful.
Or if someone, yeah, exactly. If you're halfway through a sentence that you're trying to piece together and your brain's just trying to get the puzzle pieces in the right order and they start correcting your pronunciation, that completely stops that process. And yeah, I've started explaining to people in various domains, I'm not to the point of refining yet. I'm just getting the steps still, and that sometimes helps.
That's a good point. So for those who want advice or want to learn more about user data, how would they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If you search for Shaun Knight, it's Sean Knight. You can also search for Yuzu Data on LinkedIn, or you can just email me. I'm Shaun, Sean, at yuzudata.com. And that's Yuzdata.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Shaun. Super excited to see how you continue to impact the commercial real estate space, and I'm sure we'll have you back.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.